Welcome to this episode of Beyond the Clef, live at the convention floor at Summer Music Convention 2017. And I'm here with Kerry Taylor. Kerry Taylor is the Fine Arts Director at Eanes Westlake ISD and the Director of Bands at Westlake High School. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, you're going to be talking about something today that I think is really going to help me personally. And it's having tough conversations with the people that you have to work with all the time, okay? So tell me your basic strategy when we're talking about those tough conversations with, for instance, students. What does that look like?
I think there's a couple of things that are really important to have at the very, very beginning. And probably the first and most important thing is about the relationship that you have. So if you...
That's been a theme we've been talking about all day today.
Well, I think almost everything boils down to what kind of relationship you have. So the first thing is to make sure that you somehow have established a relationship. You know, of course, I teach at the high school level, so if you're doing that with high school students and you're having this conversation with a junior or senior, you've got a pretty long track record on that. There's not a whole lot you need to have to do for that. But if it's that freshman kid that's there for the first time at band camp, you have to I think it helps you if you find some way to make some sort of connection. Maybe something they did in middle school, or maybe just something with their name, or perhaps they had an older sibling in the band before them. Somehow set up that relationship to to help the student feel more comfortable in that conversation, because not often, usually those conversations should happen behind closed doors, and it's not often that a kid is going to be in a director's office with the door closed unless they're in trouble. So you know they're already going to feel like, I'm under the gun here. I better make sure I do things well and speak carefully.
And once you have that relationship set, it's kind of like parents or any of those things. You know, my parents would get mad at me and I get mad at them, but in the end, we know that there's still the care and the love there, and you have to have that relationship built up. So sometimes when you do have to go into that mode of this is not a fun conversation, in the end they trust you.
Right. Very, very important. And you mentioned the parents, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But it's true with the kids too. I think it's very important at the beginning of the conversation that if the director's initiating the conversation, that they talk about what the conversation is about. Here's why you're in here, and here's what we're going to talk about. But the next and very most important step is for the student to say what their concerns are, or their description of whatever that may have been, what they thought happened through there. And let them speak from the beginning to the end, even though you know that perhaps they're not telling the whole truth, or they're not telling the whole story, or they're leaving some things out in there. But go ahead and try to let them have their whole say, so that they feel at some point that they've gotten their word in to begin with. So
yeah, I always start off the conversations, and I teach at the middle school level, so I always have to start off the conversation, especially with younger children. Hold on a moment. I will give you a moment to say everything you need to say, but I'm going to talk first, and then you'll have your chance, because a lot of times they have that. Sometimes they feel like that they go and. But I have to. But that's not. Right. But and that's how they talk with their friends sometimes. But sometimes in a professional, we try to teach them how to be professional, how to be adults, little young adults.
You're exactly right. I think that's an important thing for us to consider. We're teaching them how to have a critical conversation, not just correcting their behavior that they may be doing at that particular time. And they're in there because of whatever rule they broke or whatever. They haven't been attending like they're supposed to. But the reality is they're still growing up, and the school is, especially middle school, but even high school, is a time in their lives they're permitted or expected to make some mistakes and take some risks, and it's our job to kind of guide them on how to get through that. So we're teaching them how to have a critical conversation and how to correct some behavior without feeling like they've just gone through a beat down, without feeling like they've been told it's my way or the highway. That I always try to, in those conversations, find a way that the student is somehow making the choice, that they feel like, okay, I got to make a choice. Do I want to do A or do I want to do B? And of course, I'm comfortable with what either one of those choices are, but I still leave it up to the student to decide which route they're going to choose. So that way, if something happens later on, I can go, hey, remember, David, this is what you chose to do. Remember, we talked about this, and you chose this route, and now you're not following through on it. So now we go to the next level on that.
And so often in those conversations, I feel like I'm talking to my students. Gotta get that Clift on there. Hey, these things are happening. Sometimes in these relationships, when I'm working with the students and I'm trying to impart that they're trying to choose, sometimes that choice is being a leader, a positive leader or a negative leader. So many times when we're talking with the students, they feel like leadership is always a positive. Right. But I tell them all the time, you are a leader and you're leading the band negatively, you're leading this group negatively. Oh. They all look up to you and they're following you to do this.
Well, and the reality is many of our strongest leaders can be or are negative leaders. I know when I first came to Westlake many, many years ago, the kids who were the most vocal about things, they were the ones that I felt were pushing us into a negative direction. They were not helping the program what they're doing. And I had to find a way to empower those kids who had the wholesome ideas that we wanted to cultivate in the band program. And I had to find a way to empower them so they felt strong enough to hold up and speak up and stand up to those kids who were the negative leaders. But you are absolutely right. There are lots of different kind of leaders, and typically the negative leaders can be the most effective. It's a lot easier to tear something down than it is to build it up, and those negative leaders can have an immediate impact, whereas the positive ones, it takes a little bit more time to nurture. And if you're not nurturing those things, then you're going to be in trouble in the long run.
One of the problems I face when we're talking about these negative leaders, to bring that into the conversation, if I get them to, I spend extra time and extra attention to get them to try to go along the right way, well, sometimes I feel like then my more positive leaders see the attention that I'm putting on that child and see the attention that I'm giving to them because I'm trying to get them up. But they're fine, you're doing a good job, but I don't always remember to give them attention as well. Right. How do you handle that balance?
Well, I hate to say it, but what I learned how to do was I learned a little bit how to ignore those negative leaders. And I resisted the impulse to immediately jump on them and go, no, you can't say that. And when I finally discovered a way to empower those kids that knew with me, oh, we shouldn't be saying that sort of thing, for whatever the reason, when I finally found a way to turn to them and ask them for their help and how they felt about it, rather than jumping immediately on the kid who was the negative leader, that was when the negative leader all of a sudden started to feel isolated. They felt like, well, then maybe this isn't the place for me. So either they ended up changing their behavior or they got quieter, having lesser impact on the rest of us, or frankly, they decided, I'm going to go find some other place where I'm going to be this type of person and it's accepted. So honestly, yes, I would deal with it if it was a disciplinary situation and we'd come into my office and we'd have one of those conversations, which eventually would probably involve some parents, maybe some administrators, but typically I had my most success when I ignore those kids a little bit, especially in the moment that it happens. And then maybe after rehearsal, I might pull him aside and go, hey, John, I remember in rehearsal you made this comment. What impact did you think it had? Do you realize it had that impact? And if they say yes, then you know they fully intended to do that. And so you may go one direction with them. If they said, no, I did not intend that at all, then you're going to work on a different thing and helping them with their communication skills, which honestly, let's face it, you mentioned earlier, kids don't necessarily know how they come across in conversations, so they need a little bit about how to have those use the appropriate words, use the appropriate phrases, find the appropriate times to be able to do those things and have a positive impact.
Sure. So at Westlake, in Eanes ISD, Westlake, you have a there's kind of a reputation of the clientele at the school. And I hate labeling it like that because I went to a school in high school very much like that. And I was thought of all the other schools or friends at other schools, or when I went to camps, they're like, oh, you're the rich school. And I hated it because that wasn't me personally. My family wasn't like that. But that's what we got labeled as. Mm-hmm. But I know that there is a part of that, and there is a different component than we were just talking with Gabe Musella about his Title I program, and a whole different side of things. So that's kind of some of the things that you have to deal with in a different way. So I'm sure that there's a lot of parent conversations that are very difficult that you have to have. Can you give us an example of how you handle that?
Yeah. First of all, I don't think it's the affluency that makes the parents feel more active or feel more entitled to be a part of the program. I think it has more to do with what they do in their daily lives. Most of the parents in my school district or my kids, they're their own managers, or they own their own company, or they work independently as a consultant. So their daily lives they're used to managing other people and telling them what they should be doing.
I've never thought of it that way.
Them.
That's a really interesting
So when they come to me, that's the idea. They're going to come to me and they're going to tell me, oh, this isn't good, you need to change this, that sort of thing. So I understand. I think affluency may come with that, but it's not the cause of that. But they frequently will come in. In my experience, they're all wanting what they think is best for their child. And that may be best that my child is principal trumpet, because that's going to help him get into this great school, and it's going to look good on his report, on his resume, and that's where he needs to be. Besides, he's put in all this amount of time, I put in all this money. He deserves it because we've done all the things we're supposed to be doing.
And that's a parent's job.
Yeah. So my first thing is to, again, find that relationship. Fortunately, I've been there long enough that I have a relationship either with that parent or with someone that they know. My brother lives in the community, and for the longest time, he was very active in the Boy Scouts. So some of these people coming to me may not necessarily know me, or it's their first time to work with me, but maybe they worked with my brother. My wife works in the community. She's in the high school. She's an English teacher. Well, maybe they've had her somewhere along the line. So I try to find those connections in there, in that relationship at the very beginning, and then I go, so I believe we're here to talk about, we'll say, John's behavior on such and such date. What is your understanding about what transpired? So my first thing is to get their understanding, give them a chance to say what their concerns are, and specifically, I want them to say, I would like to see this done, I'd like to see that done, I'd like to see this done. And that's, in that part of the conversation, I'm simply asking them questions. Some of it's clarification, some of it is to guide them a little bit where I want them to go, but typically they're talking through their 9 out of 10 times, I feel like they want to feel like somebody heard their concerns. Whether or not something's done with it, again, in their professional life, most of them have bosses as well.
Right.
They're used to sitting around the table and throwing out ideas and concepts, and maybe yours is the winner that day, maybe it's the guy sitting next to you. So in my experience, I haven't had many direct problems that couldn't be resolved by listening and talking through them. So,
especially in person or on the phone.
We
were talking about this earlier. Once I realized that I got this from my principal, Greg Hernandez at Friendship ISD, and one of the things he never once responded to my emails. Uh-huh. He was by far one of the best principals that you could possibly have.
Right.
My current principal, Gina Laughlin, is also just as amazing. He's never once responded to my emails, but through email.
Right.
When I emailed him, he would always call me or come to me,
Right.
and I asked him about it once. I said, "Hey, I emailed that to you. You could have shot it back." I said, well, "It's much better when we do it face to face. We get more out of that."
Yeah.
And that's something that I feel like is lost sometimes with technology, and especially if there's any connotation of personality that could be taken out of that, because you could take a negative or positive spin on everything.
Oh yes.
You gotta go and do it face to face or on the phone.
Yeah.
And I use that. My wife works in my school too, and so I use that all the time.
Yeah.
Well, Mrs. Beal said.
Yeah.
So it's very nice.
I very much agree about the emails. I only respond to an email with typing out things if it's a factual type thing.
Right,
Like
right.
the meeting's going to be at 7 o'clock or something like, here's the rule as it's been, not the rule, but here's our information as we're going to do the schedule on this day. But if it's any sort of an issue about a child's behavior or the philosophy of the program, I typically respond with, very good point, I'd love to talk to you about this. Please let me know when you'll be available, or here's when I'm available, and let me know which one's convenient for you. And typically I'll get a call, because again, my parents have a little bit more freedom in their schedule, so typically we end up talking on the phone. If it gets heated on the phone and it's not going anywhere, then I go, you know what, I think you're right, and I always try to find a point that I can agree with them, at least to say, you brought up some very valid concerns, thank you. And I might go, will you give me a little bit of time to look into this? And then perhaps you'd be willing to come in and talk to me.
Right.
That is when most of them go, I feel good. You heard what I had to say, and I've got a good response from you. And most of it doesn't go beyond that very much when it's their concern that's brought up. If it's my concern with their kid, then I go, it's time I need you to come in and talk and hear some things.
Sure.
So that's a little different approach.
Well, now let's transition over to conversations with administration. Most of the time when you're working with administration at the district level or at the school level, you're working with somebody who's in a supervisor role from where you're at. And so talk about the hard conversations there. Now, you're also a fine arts director, so it's really you have a really unique perspective on this than most. But talk about your conflicts with administration. I wouldn't say conflicts, but the hard conversations.
Two things. We'll talk about when I'm the one that's on the directed end of whatever the problem may be. I'm the one that's causing it.
Good perspective.
And then we'll talk about where I'm the one that's having to address the person who has done the wrong or needs to make some corrective behavior. I think when I'm going in and my administrators, my superiors are talking to me, one of the things I've already done is I've made them very much aware that they can't do without me, that I'm there to solve problems for them. And they frequently, my principal called me this morning about another teacher in my department who was upset about a scheduling thing. And his first response was to call me. And we talked for about 5 minutes, and he goes, well, would you talk to this person and get this resolved? Let me know what I need to do. So he knows he needs me. He comes to me to resolve those sorts of things. And they all know I'm needed there, okay? And that's required that sometimes I give up some things I'd rather be doing. Like maybe I'm working with one kid and all of a sudden I get a phone call and where I want to go, you know what, let me finish up here in 10 minutes and I'll be down there. But I realize, this is the superintendent. I need to leave right now, and I tell my student, we're done, let's pick this up another time. So I make some sacrifices in order for that to be done, and that could be a scheduling thing or all sorts of different things, facility. And then I go in there, and typically they will tell me what their concerns are. Maybe it's an unhappy parent who's made some accusations about the program, or I had one recently where we had a parent of a student accusing one of the student's friends in the band program of bullying that student. It hadn't come to me. I wasn't aware of it. The students hadn't come to me. I wasn't aware of it. So the first time I was hearing about it was through the principal. which kind of upset the principal, but he agreed that he would talk to me. And then, so I had to listen to what it was, and fortunately he goes, so what do you think is going on? And at that point in time, I was able to tell him, I think this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. I was also able to tell him, his name's Steve. I don't think he'd mind me saying that. I was also, because Steve, look, I would really appreciate it if you would direct these people to me. This is a very simple issue. I'm the one that can handle this. I'm the one that's going to resolve this. I've got experience with it. I know the situation. Right. There's a lot of falsehoods in what you have, what information you got. Before you feel like you need to step in and do this, why don't you just tell them, hey, why don't you give Mr. Taylor a call, see what he says, and then if you're unhappy with it, let me know and I'll step into it. So I'm trying to get him to be that a little more proactive.
And I'm sure he'll
be
appreciative of taking that workload.
Oh yeah,
off.
they don't want more. Yeah. So then on the other side of things, I had a conversation several years ago with a teacher in our department that we were, as an administrative team, we were very unhappy with her work product. And there wasn't any specific incident that would require us to release them because of impropriety with the student or anything like that. It was just a series of ongoing things, not doing paperwork on time, maybe not being at your duty on time, and then there were some things about the product of the kids not being what we expected they could do. We had heard some information from the kids, so it was a collection of things, if you will, not one incident. And it fell upon me. My principal goes, Kerry, your turn. Get in there and go see what you can do on this. So it fell upon me to have that conversation. That's pretty difficult. This teacher had been at the school for 7 or 8 years, so it was pretty much in a comfort mode by then. Felt like things were going well. Previous administrators have not said much to her. Maybe some of this had not bubbled up or anything, but I had to sit with this person who I was friends with and talk about their lack of performance or poor performance over the previous year. Eventually leading to, and I had to talk to her about we're going to put you on a professional growth plan. This is supported. Our next meeting will be with the principal and you and me, and I'll be there. In that meeting, I'm there to help you, to help facilitate and help you get to where the principal is going to tell you you're going to need to be. And you can expect the X, Y, and Z to happen, give them information. So I try not to be in an adversarial type position, but I also try to let them know that I'm part of the decision-making process. And in this example, on that professional growth plan, there are going to be 3 or 4 things on there that I'm going to be the one that says, yes, you completed it, or no, you didn't complete it. But let me tell you how we're going to get there, and here are the steps you're going to make to get there. And those are pretty hard when it's somebody maybe you were at, you're at a party a month before or happy hour the month before, and then all of a sudden you have to talk about, you're getting ready to lose your job unless something changes.
Sure. So your approach there is more of a trying to show them that you're on their side.
Yes.
That you're trying to help, and everybody's trying to help. Just ultimately to do the right thing for everybody there. Right. Well, now with that, what about your contemporaries? Now this might not be your situation now, but let's say you're trying to work with your contemporaries in your program at Westlake High School and one of your direct workers or whatnot.
Okay.
Talk about those hard conversations. Those are some of the hardest ones I have.
One of my assistant directors, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Like some of the times when I'm working and I have great people around me, but sometimes I feel like my assistant director right now is like a brother because I am with him more than I'm with anybody.
Right.
Every day, and then to go into that and say, okay, this is what we really need to do in the end. Yeah. How do you have those conversations?
Yeah, I had somebody use a phrase last night, my work wife.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, right. So those are interesting, and I will start with first. I like to try to put people in a position that they will be most successful. and that's different for different people. I also like, as the leader of our team, I like discourse. I know some directors that are most comfortable with, here's what I think needs to be done, and you're going to do it. If you need help in figuring out how to do it, I'm here to help you. But we're not going to discuss what's going to be done. And then I know some directors who are very comfortable with, well, why don't you do this half and I'll do this half. So it's very much a 50-50 type relationship. Not recently, but I'm quite a bit older than the people I've been working with, more experienced. But I still like the discourse. I still want to be able to close the door and one of the staff members go, so Kerry, I saw you doing this approach with these kids, maybe the brass tone production. Why did you do that? And so we would I like having that discussion about, well, here's what I thought I was after, and here's what I thought I was producing. Would you do it differently? And then I would want you to feel confident enough. In fact, I'd be disappointed if you would go, oh no, I'm going to do it your way. That's the best way. I don't want that. That doesn't help me become a better teacher. It just kind of promulgates what's been going on in the program through there. On the other hand,
builds in complacency too.
Oh yeah. The other hand, perhaps I would go to teacher. I observe the teachers, and I'd go, so you told me when we were talking a couple of weeks ago that your priority right now in preparation for your UIL contest, pardon me, is better intonation in your upper woodwinds. So I saw you in class today. I was only there for about 30 minutes, so I didn't necessarily see everything that you did in the whole class. But in that 30 minutes, I only heard one comment about upper woodwind intonation. How and when are you addressing that? You've already said that was a priority for you. So in this case, that person has identified it as a priority. So my question is, how are you addressing it? When are you addressing that? So I try to help them realize what it is they are doing or aren't doing. I had one of my mentors sit in one of my rehearsals when it was probably like my third or fourth year teaching, and he had a little chart on a piece of notebook, and tone production, rhythm, intonation, balance, 3 or 4 different things, dynamics. And he just sat there the whole rehearsal, and he kept track of my comments in that rehearsal. So after the rehearsal, he goes, well, how did it go? And I said, well, I thought it went pretty well. I know I kind of spent too much time on the rhythm stuff today. Oh, really? You think so? Yeah, I'd spent a lot of time on that. And he goes, well, what did you think your priority was? And it was like, well, I wanted to spend more time on this. And he goes, well, let me show you something. And he pulled up the notepad, and it had everything listed there. And rhythm was only like 2 or 3 times that I had talked about rhythm in comments. And it wasn't by minutes, but it certainly was by how many different things I addressed in there. And I was like, okay, I realize it's not quite what I thought. What I thought happened in class wasn't what was coming across to the kids. And I think that's what I'm there for in terms to help my own staff, and then have those conversations with them. I always want to make sure that I start those things with, this is what I see you doing well, and I'm happy with you doing this. I want you to keep more of doing that. And maybe it's even, if it's at the end of a year or the end of a marching season or something, it may be next year as we're planning. I'm hoping to build more of that into your program so that you're spending more time with that. But let's identify some things that I think you still need to work on. Or I'm in a staff where I have multiple people. So, David on our staff, we don't have anybody really working with the trombones. that is really knowledgeable in there, and I think you may be able to do that. Would you be willing to spend some time this summer and get some more skills with that, do a little research on those sorts of things, and then come back, and I'd like to put you kind of in charge of some of those trombones and working with those guys.
Right.
So
I always feel like when you're a head director, you're really managing a staff of a business, a small business, and then you have to teach every now and then. That's half the things that I do. I feel like are just managing the people around me, and then I finally get down to actually teaching kids. There's so much with that. Well, Kerry, thank you so much for being on and being a guest. I want to get you on back on our program because there's so many great things that I've learned from you today, and I know our listeners have, and we really appreciate you coming out. Of course, we appreciate Director's Choice for sponsoring us.
It's a great idea.
It's very nice.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah.
So thank you again, and we'll have you back on soon.
Thank you. Great. Pleasure to be here.